his credibility worldwide shrinks. Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power.
The alternative to a rules-based order is a world in which might makes right and winners take all. And that would be a far more violent and unstable world for all of us.
Good day to you. Welcome to another episode of Bad Beat Media. I wanted to talk to you today quickly about something that I saw online, and probably you have seen it yourself. Let me share it with you. It's a video from Biden, and where he says something that just baffled me so extremely that I want to hear your take on it as well.
His credit.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go.
Credibility worldwide shrinks. Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power.
So this part is something that is just amazing to me. And for the viewers who are not aware what this is about, this is during the summit with Vladimir Putin, and he is talking about Biden here. So for everyone who thinks he may be talking about himself, no, he is talking about Biden. So I'll do it one more time. He's talking about Putin. I'll do it one more time. Keep it in mind. He's talking about Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
His credibility worldwide shrinks. Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engage in activities that he is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power.
So I wanted to really focus on this.
Mm-hmm.
And why do I want to focus on this? When I saw this, Peter, I literally thought this is a joke. It was so cynical, so ironic.
Like it's a deep fake, one of those videos that's faked.
You are taking the words from my mouth. I was going to say, this seems like a deep fake because what he is saying here is like talking in the mirror. What he is saying here is like, it's literally talking about the United States. You know, like, how would it be if the United States, if a lot of people around the world would know that we manipulate elections around the world, and that would be like a country desperately clinging on to its status as a world superpower. I mean, you cannot get it more cynical than this. And I wanted to speak to you about this because I think a very interesting thing is happening here, namely that this shows such a tremendous lack of awareness, okay, in the Biden administration, but I think among a lot of Americans, to be very honest, and such a, in my opinion, despicable sense of superiority that you don't even realize, that you just don't even realize how ridiculous this is what you are saying right now. And in my opinion, it shows one very important thing, and something that maybe your parents, my parents can really relate to. And that is that for previous generations, like the boomer generation or or even before, they got away with such blatant lying and for pointing the finger at other people, that now when you have someone from that generation running the country, Joe Biden, who's from a completely far away dinosaur generation, you get somebody who doesn't even realize how absolutely hypocrite and ridiculous it sounds, and just baffling to me as somebody from another generation, from the millennial generation, baffling to me that you just don't even realize how absurd it is what you do. In other words, like it's nested so deep into the psyche of someone like Biden, but a lot of Americans, that you can get away with this stuff, not realizing that luckily with internet, the world is changing. Like, you know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's get this straight, Jack. So the funny thing is that the first sentence he said after that was technically accurate, because he said, what would it be like if people around the world knew that the US were interfering? I'm like, yeah, that's a very good question. But then the second sentence, he kind of gave the game away, which, this touches on something that has absolutely fascinated me, which is our ruling classes of powerful countries throughout history, are they knowledgeable about the sort of evil or negative effects of their foreign policies, but they're cynical and they knowingly do what they would otherwise recognize as evil, but because they see it as benefiting their group, they do it anyway? Or are they ignorant of the sort of negative or bad actions that their government has carried out? And I've come to the position I'm very much leaning on the ignorant side, going along with Hanlon's razor, that you should never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity or ignorance. And I think I certainly, or most certainly with Biden, certainly with the vast majority of the boomer generation in the US, just think about it. Throughout their entire lives, they never had easy access to critiques of US foreign policy that would actually explain those actions from the perspective of the people that they harmed. All the time, when they would hear about US foreign policy actions, the policies carried out, they would hear about them in positive terms. So instead of the US government is funding death squads in Latin America and training killers at the School of the Americas, for instance, they would instead hear that same fact being reported to them and interpreted to them as the US is fighting against, godless, evil, slavery promoting communism and promoting freedom around the world. So my strong suspicion is that outside of a few people, basically people who go and get degrees in international relations theory, from a young age, they're planning to join the kind of foreign policy apparatus, the State Department, the Pentagon, etc. Outside of a small minority of people who's basically the way they understand the world. If you're a realist in IR, you believe that morality does not apply to international relations. And anytime you attempt to say, oh, this is a good thing or a bad thing, you're engaged in a category error, because morality just doesn't apply in this domain. Outside of those people, I think most people simply do not know the negative aspects of their country's foreign policy. And George Orwell expressed it really well, like half a century ago. He said the nationalist not only does not disapprove of atrocities committed by his own side, but he has a remarkable ability to never hear about them in the first place.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, especially when it comes to like previous generations who were very dependent on the mainstream media system. But right now, with the internet, and more importantly, a president of the United States saying it himself, there is probably quite some ignorance among liberals in the United States. I know of quite a few as my colleagues at the university, and I can honestly tell you, some of them are one of my very best friends, but they become visibly upset when I talk about US atrocities abroad, like visibly upset. So I realize, even though these are some of the most prominent professors in their field, so I do agree that some people are literally blind to that stuff. On the other hand, Joe Biden is not blind. That man has been, in my opinion, evil throughout his life as a politician. Whether it's the U.S. crime bill, whether it's now how he deals with ICE or the children at the border who are still being put in cages. I don't believe that he is unaware. I mean, let me share something else with you. Let me see if I can quickly find it. So here, check this out. So he right now told the world, like, okay, it's ridiculous, that country that tries to overthrow, that tries to mingle in other countries' affairs. So this was in the Washington Post. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So we're only talking about during the Cold War. So during the Cold War, the U.S. tried to change other countries' governments 72 times. And this is by the Washington Post. So probably it's even on the lower side.
Yeah, I think what they're doing is they're probably writing about this book, Covert Regime Change. Can you just check to see if that's the case?
So this is, I think you're right. Let me check this quickly. So here's about covert political warfare. So probably you're right.
Who's writing this? Who's the author of this? Because the Monkey Cage, they invite political scientists to
Lindsay.
Yeah, Lindsay O'Rourke. Yeah, she wrote that book, Covert Regime Change, which is kind of like a standard U.S. political science approach to the topic. So if anything, it airs on the conservative side, but nonetheless, there are dozens.
Probably Washington Post, yeah.
And there are that book is just about really much more like a dirty kinds of actions, like assassinations, supporting coups, etc. But then that's not even including just election meddling. What the Russian government was accused of, over the past 4 years now.
Yeah, posting Jesus pictures on Facebook, and that was meddling in U.S.
You have a problem with masturbation, Jesus will hold your hand and help you beat it.
Right, exactly, and that is Russian meddling with U.S. Politics. But So to get back to your point about ignorance, so I agree there is a segment, especially of the older generation, that probably is ignorant. But I do not believe that. So I also believe that there is. So you say, like, okay, if you can choose between ignorance or what is it? Nefariousness?
Malice, nefarious, cynicism. Yeah.
Right. So then you probably should err to the side of ignorance. I think you have too much of a positive view of humanity, realizing that we are still partly into the 500-year legacy of colonization. I think people can be inherently extremely evil, and if you see the way Israel as a society is developing, then I see something going on in both Israel and the United States, and I think that is something you would see in a lot of powerful states. I don't think this is exclusive to the U.S. or Israel. But as they are currently, the U.S. is the most powerful state, but Israel, one of the most powerful states in the world, even though it's tiny, is that powerful states and powerful governments, powerful groups of people, have a fascinating, but at the same time disgusting, ability to project what they do themselves onto their victims. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
So the U.S. is literally blaming all its victims of things that it does itself, whether it's meddling in affairs, whether it's violence, terrorism, but also. So I saw today an interview with Max Blumenthal on the electronic intifada, where he says that it's amazing how the Israelis are literally using, for example, Black Lives Matter kind of talking points to try and tell the world we are being victimized by the Palestinians. So they use this like blue square instead of a black square, and it's like co-opting the kind of social justice language you see from oppressed people. And this is just so disgustingly cynical because it turns the oppressor, and they did it successfully for decades, into the oppressed. Whilst, like it's a rational human being cannot even make the claim that Israel is being victimized by the people they oppress.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think rational human beings can do that so long as the information in their heads does not support that, I think, more accurate worldview. So imagine if you're just a person of average political influence in Israel, Jewish Israeli, and your media sources are basically explaining the whole conflict to you as a matter of these kind of rabid fundamentalist terrorists in Hamas causing or inflicting violence on innocent civilians within Israel. And you're simply denied access in practical terms because you're only, watching maybe TV news once or twice a week. You're not really investigating this. You're not reading books about it. You're not seeking out other perspectives. You're just kind of passively trying to keep up a little bit with politics. You have never been exposed to the information about what's happening to Arab Israelis, what's happening to Palestinians in the occupied territories. So the only information you have to construct a narrative worldview is one in which your group is the victim because you see all of the violence that affects your group, but you are largely shielded from the violence that affects the other group. That is explained to you as self-defense violence. You know what I mean? So you can have cynical people. Like if you're a psychopath, for instance, if you have a brain defect, you lack the ability to exercise empathy, then no problem. You can be as cynical as you want, and that will work very well for the way your brain functions. But if you're a psychologically healthy person, I think the only thing that can really explain it is either you have something like international relations theory to help you form a worldview in which you are still a good person. But sadly, unfortunately, the international system is so anarchic that we simply cannot apply morality to it. So unless you have something like that kind of an ideology that can reduce cognitive dissonance from the feeling of I am a good person, yet I am supporting violence perpetrated by my government, you either need to be a psychopath or you need to have a narrative worldview that explains that apparent discrepancy. Does that make sense?
So yeah, it makes sense. But that brings me to, so I think we have a dichotomy here in that there is a group of people that is aware, for example, politicians themselves, and often these are psychopaths, let's be honest. But also, let's not forget when we look at Israel, for example, and the way they deal with Palestinians, is that, for example, when you see pro-Israel demonstrations, they align with the alt-right, they align with fascist groups in the UK. Like this, what's his name? Something with Spencer guy, Nick Spencer, Rick Spencer.
Yeah.
If you do that, the mask has fallen off. There's no way you're going to convince me that you're just ignorant and that you're teaming up with fascists.
Well, except like with me, like when I was growing up and becoming socialized into politics, I was very much on the right wing because that was in my social environment. So I would never have viewed myself as being on the bad side. Quite the opposite. I remember reading about the war on Vietnam and thinking, oh, it was so terrible that the U.S. left that war because then the poor people of Vietnam were left to godless communism to enslave them. That's a much greater evil. So the war.
That is different. That is different than these fascist groups. To be very honest, like that is a kind of a savior complex superiority idea that is not as evil as like how can I say that, these ethno-nationalists who just want a white society or only a Jewish society. That is pure awareness. That is, in my opinion, that psychopathy you just talked about. I don't believe that these people are unaware, especially not in the age of the internet and the Twitter debates and stuff, where you can see everything that is happening to the Palestinians, even though they try to suppress it. I shall tell you a very interesting story. I tried to comment today under one of the videos, I think it was of Max Blumenthal, and I said the word Palestine, not realizing that that is not allowed. So every time I came back, I saw my comment was deleted. So I tried it like 10 times until I realized, okay, what happens if I turn Palestine, and not with a couple of stars in it, because that doesn't work anymore. They're smart enough. So only change the word Palestine in Palestine, BAHL. And guess what? The comment was not deleted. The comment stayed online, you know? So in other words, things as Syria, Palestine, you name it, are now actively being suppressed, being censored by Western media.
Right. So then you have I mean, I think that helps support the perspective I have on this, and that is like you have these.
No, but let me finish for one moment, then I'll let you go.
Mhm.
So I agree when that would be very successful. I agree that's the case, but you see a change in public opinion. Why? Because it becomes so blatantly obvious right now what's happening in Palestine. I mean, and you're right. There is still huge suppression going on. Maybe I am too optimistic in that sense that I think everybody can reach that information. But it seems to me so hard to not be confronted with that severe oppression that you see in Palestinian and other non-European people around the world that are being oppressed by the West. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's not only Israel and Palestine. It's everywhere where the West is meddling in the affairs of a country. Whether it's still things that are happening in the Congo, you know, or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria. It doesn't matter. It's everywhere where you go. You see the same kind of dynamic going on, you know, like I lost my strain of thought, but
No, but you're right. Like you do see that same dynamic all over the world, and I think it's a mix of like what I call in my book like demand side factors and supply side factors. Although I don't like the economic linkage there, but anyway, like so you have on the side of inside our brains, we have all sorts of biases that prevent our opinions from changing. So if I am a big supporter of the Israeli government, and I see some tweets, like let's say a video of Israeli police brutalizing some Palestinian person, I have so many ways to argue around that. There's this whole concept of Pallywood, the idea that Palestinians often will, maybe, you know, people in Hamas will often doctor videos or deceptively edit videos. So then I'll think to myself, you know what, this looks really bad at first, but, you know, perhaps the context is missing from this video, or maybe it's even a deep fake. So I can't really trust that. So now my previously held opinion can stay intact. I don't need to change anything.
right. So then you have a combination of motivation plus ignorance. So on the one hand, you can stay ignorant, but on the other hand, you are motivated to stay ignorant because you are partial, because you are in favor of one group of people. It's the same with Western meddling in other countries, you know. Many people, I think, deep inside may have that cognitive dissonance, that conflict, knowing there's something not right going on, but to keep their just world belief, to keep their idea of, oh, we are just and they are bad, they refuse to take in like the information that you get from anti-imperialists, socialists, people who resist against this narrative, and double down on the idea like, hey, what we're doing there is good stuff. You know, it's like this sense of superiority. And you probably also see that a bit, that combination in Biden, what you just saw now. But I wanted to share with you another example, and this is a bit older, but I still think it's quite relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same idea. Let me quickly share this with you. Can you see this?
Yep.
Okay.
Our administration is committed to leading with diplomacy, to advance the interests of the United States, and to strengthen the rules-based international order. That system is not an abstraction. It helps countries resolve differences peacefully, coordinate multilateral efforts effectively, and participate in global commerce with the assurance that everyone is following the same rules. The alternative to a rules-based order is a world in which might makes right and winners take all. And that would be a far more violent and unstable world for all of us. Today, we'll have an opportunity to discuss key priorities, both domestic and global, so that China can better understand our administration's intentions and approach. We'll also discuss our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability. That's why they're not merely internal matters, and why we feel an obligation to raise these issues here today.
China is firmly opposed to U.S. interference in China's internal affairs. We have expressed our staunch opposition to such interference, and we will take firm actions in response. On human rights, we hope that the United States will do better on human rights. China has made steady progress in human rights, and the fact is that there are many problems within the United States regarding human rights, which is admitted by the US itself as well. The United States has also said that countries can't rely on force in today's world to resolve the challenges we face. And it is a failure to use various means to topple the so-called authoritarian states. And the challenges facing the United States in human rights are deep-seated. They did not just emerge over the past 4 years, such as Black Lives Matter. It did not come up only recently.
So again, this is almost a carbon copy of what just happened today. And that is, the blatant hypocrisy is just painful. It makes my eyes hurt, man.
You know,
Like,
it's an even better example on exactly that point, the hypocrisy. 2 years ago, I believe it was 2019, beginning of 2019, Marco Rubio and some other, I think it was a senator, wrote an open letter where they said, we are very disturbed about reports that as many as 500,000 Uyghurs in Xinjiang may be imprisoned, which would make this the largest example of an ethnic minority mass incarceration in the world. Meanwhile, something like between 1 and 1.5 million ethnic minorities are imprisoned in the US. So, you know, it's amazing.
right, but like I said, and I've said that in one of our previous videos, the human rights they think about is human rights for white people. It's not about black people. It's not about Arabs. It's not about Iranians, Persians, Chinese. It's about white people. And they don't realize that a lot of the rest of the world doesn't experience your human rights, Mr. Blinken and Mr. Biden. The rest of the world, especially those with a tanned skin, do not experience your human rights because of the way you treat them. And when I see this Blinken, just like with Biden, and he says, get this, he says, if we don't stick to a rule-based order, we get a world where might is right, okay, where the powerful takes all, where the winner takes all, he says.
What an unusual idea. I don't even know how
Might is right, the winner takes all. I mean, this is literally, again, almost a deep fake. This is like you're talking about your own country, you hypocrite. And you're saying that to the Chinese. So you're supporting a genocide in Yemen. You're supporting the oppression of Palestinians. You are bombing Syrians. You've destroyed Libya. You've destroyed Iraq. You are currently still in Afghanistan. You're doing covert operations in Africa and Latin America. And you're going to say to China that the way they treat their minorities is something that, and that is something that goes against the rule-based order, where if we don't have that rule-based order, it's a world of might is right, and the powerful will take it all. This is literally stating the world as it is right now. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then, and one more thing is that when he talks about so many people are incarcerated, you know that the United States has, what was it again?
5% of the world's
Well,
population.
5% of the world populations, but 25% of the world's prison population,
In the land
of which, here we go, of which majority are black and brown people being used for capitalists as slave labor, you know, for like $1 or half $1 a day. And then you say, again, I told you, right? I told you before, they're so good at projecting their own behavior on others, on their victims.
I don't agree with almost anything in Freudian psychology, but projection is very real.
This is pure projection, you know, like saying that China is doing to Xinjiang what you are doing to black people. You know what I mean? I mean, and what Israel is doing to Palestinians. Okay, maybe in a different way, but you know what I mean?
What the Gulf states are doing to Shia Muslims, you know, like all sorts of things. What the wealthy throughout Latin America do to the poor, and the light skinned in Latin America due to the melanated.
What pretty much the light skinned people are doing all over the world, where they have the power outside of Europe, whether it's Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, New Zealand, United States, Canada, Australia, I can go on, or South Africa, I can go on and on. Everywhere where you have whites settling in a non-European country, they are oppressing the indigenous people. You know what I mean? And then you blame other groups of people who suffer under your oppression to do exactly the thing that you're doing. Yeah. It's just insane to me.
It's just people with DC-itis, people working in DC in politics. The culture there, the widely shared narratives there are so disconnected from reality and so biased by in-group bias, really. So the way that they understand it is completely different from what you and I have been talking about. They think in terms of, like, you know, they really do believe this claptrap about a liberal rules-based international order. And they really do believe that the US government's role throughout the world has been overwhelmingly positive, because it's attempted to protect people from the horrors of communism being used to describe everything from actual communists to peasants who want land redistribution.
Or anti-imperialism.
Right. So they really do. This is the way that they view the world. So if you were to say what you've just said to them, they would get very upset, because it just completely clashes with their interpretation of everything that the US government has done.
Even though they know that they're killing millions of people in the Middle East, I mean, how can you be so unaware?
Well, I mean, even on that, like, remember in, what was it, the first few years of the second war on Iraq, there was that Lancet study, I think the most prestigious medical journal in the UK, that used epidemiological methods to estimate that about 500,000 people had died due to violence because of the invasion. Right. And you just saw all over the internet at that time, and in print media and TV, all sorts of people all of a sudden became armchair philosophers of science and began to critique the epidemiological study for its methodology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what did they choose as a better estimate? The Iraqi body count, which was a group of people who, this was their methodology. They looked at media reports and added up the number of people described as killed by violence in media reports, added those up and said, this is a much more scientific way of estimation. You know, and that, of course, is ridiculous. We can laugh at how much of a mistake that would be if your goal is truth. But this is what they really believed. They feel bad when they hear the estimate of 500,000 people. They don't like that feeling. They look for some way to get rid of that feeling. They see, IBC, they're estimating only tens of thousands of people.
Again, that motivated ignorance, remember?
Right. So that makes me feel better. And so I'm going to adopt that. And that just happens throughout. So on every step of the way, even if we're talking about peasants in Latin America fighting for land reform, nonetheless, sorry, I don't even know what this is.
Okay.
Hello?
So while Peter is gone.
Yes, thank you. You can just leave it downstairs. Thank you.
I'm still baffled by that blatant hypocrisy. It's just amazing to me. So also when you see these these capitalists in Latin America, for example, being supported by the United States every time an indigenous person wins, like you just saw in where was it again? Just now, that guy with the
Peru.
with the cowboy hat.
Yeah.
You know, like this simple man, you know, from the rural areas who wants a left-wing government, socialist, who is democratically elected. And of course, every time a left-wing government wins, let me say it even better. Every time an indigenous person wins who wants equal rights for his own community, the United States comes in, okay, a bunch of white supremacists, colonialists come in and gonna say to the rest of the world, this is an authoritarian government, these were unfair elections. Then they overthrow it and put a right-wing capitalist, most often white supremacist Europe elite, into government. And again, you see the blaming on the victims of what the United States does, saying that they are authoritarian and they are doing false elections, while the US is overthrowing the government and putting some hardcore capitalist authoritarians in there who use death squads to oppress the indigenous people, and then say, oh, good, we saved the liberal democratic order.
The rules-based liberal international order is safe. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
right.
from their own perspective, they would look at, a movement by peasants for land reform, not as it really is. They would see it as, oh God, this is very dangerous because it sounds somewhat like communism. So they associate it in their mind with, Stalin. And so they think, we have to stop it. And even if we have to use some methods that we think, it hurts our hearts, we'll cry some crocodile tears, but we have to do this because it's for the greater good. The ends justify the means. And so if we have to get in bed with some violent right-wing death squads, then, so be it, because we're preventing a far greater evil from befalling these poor benighted peasants that think they're doing something to help themselves, but would actually be hurting themselves.
I tend to be more of a believer into the nefariousness of people. I think there is really an evil capitalist elite that knows exactly what it's doing, and that's a cabal. I believe it's a cabal of people who are running the show in the background. And people will say, oh, that's conspiracy, and of course that's a way to shut people up. But maybe this is something for a next video. But I saw a very good Al Jazeera piece, I think, about that secretive cabal of UK descendants of colonial families that are still running the show in the Middle East in the background. And then you can say, oh, this is all conspiracy. No, it's not a conspiracy. It's actually happening. There are...
Yeah. I forget who said it, but they put it really well. It was just kind of like, you don't have to imagine like a particular organization with particular members that are getting together in dark cigar smoke-filled rooms.
Which happens though.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where they meet. You just have a relatively small group of people with a lot of power whose interests align rather closely, but those interests are quite different from the vast majority. And as we know, just from political science studies, the wealthy do exert far more power than the non-wealthy. So it's really just a matter of semantics, it seems to me. When people put it in the way that you just put it, they would say, oh my God, that sounds like a Illuminati conspiracy theory.
But that's also a way to shut people up.
Yeah,
it's the same as calling anti-Zionism anti-Semitism. It's a way to shut people up. It's the same thing as what you often see when racists say, oh, you're going to pull the race card. It's totally not focusing on the content of the message. It's just refuting the message altogether by using some kind of, how can you say that?
Like a smoke screen.
Qualification. Oh, that's a race card. He pulls the race card, as if that wins the argument.
Right. Just like the new term, and it's actually not new. It turns out it came from the IRA UK struggle in the 70s. Somebody wrote a letter to the editor and said, "This is whataboutism." So basically,
yes,
this term is now used to shut down debate, but it's quite funny to look at the origin of it, because basically this guy was a supporter of the UK military, the UK government, against the Irish. And so the Irish people who supported the IRA were saying, you're criticizing us for using the only weapons that we can use to try to win liberation for ourselves. But we're basically just pointing out that the violent actions taken by the British government are far worse. And so this guy says, "Oh, that's whataboutism." It's basically another way for them to eliminate that bad feeling, and that's what it does. It just eliminates the bad feeling and restores equanimity.
Yeah, we could make a whole show around this. You had the same thing with what is it again? Not whataboutism, but oh yeah, Godwin's law. That's a Godwin. I remember that they would always use, like if, for example, if you would compare a state with fascism or with Nazism. I mean, we need to learn from our history. So sure, we can compare. And then they would throw in, "Oh, that's Godwin's law. That's Godwin." You remember that? Do you remember those days? So
no, they're still with us. I mean, the misuse of the word compare has driven me crazy for the past 2 decades, because there was a German newspaper that pointed out in 2003 that the US government vis-a-vis Iraq was acting like the Nazi regime in its propaganda. Okay. Yeah. And then people said, "Oh, you can't compare the US with the Nazis." No, I'm sorry. You don't understand the language you're using. The word compare means both to equate, but also to show differences between two things. Hence, you can compare apples and oranges. They share the fact that they're both fruit and they're both sweet. They're different because one is, orange, blah, 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 blah. What they really mean to say is you can't equate the US and the Nazi regime. And sure, fine, but nobody was equating. They were
but if we are going to do the equate game, or if we're going to do the compare game, and we take into account the millions of Middle Easterners, the genocide on the Native Americans, and so on and on and on, and Vietnam and everything, and the nukes on Japan, I'm not going to say that Germany was worse than the United States. I'm also not going to say that the other one is worse than the other one. They're both evil. It's very simple. And it's time that we all speak out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and interestingly there, I think a comparison between the US and Nazi Germany is particularly apt, considering that Hitler looked at the US as an example in 2 senses. One, for its treatment of the natives. The US got more Lebensraum by eliminating, massacring, genociding the
white
natives.
Supremacy. This was just a white supremacist example.
The anti-miscegenation laws, the way that the eugenics movement was developing in the US. Hitler loved those 2 things. So a comparison is actually very revealing.
Exactly. And well, I think we can talk about a lot of things, but I guess you have to go, right?
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. Then it was a good, relatively quick chat. And I think we still have a lot of things to talk about.
Oh, yeah. This could be a running series on this topic.
But we will do that next time. Okay.
All
Thanks
right,
for this chat, man, and talk to you soon.
Good to talk to you. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.